Welcome to this video on the top 10 vampires of Clan Nosferatu from the game Vampire the Masquerade. Each clan has its unique disadvantages, but the Nosferatu are hit especially hard as it is impossible for them, barring the use of obfuscate or disguises, to ever blend in with human society. The physical deformity afflicting the clan has resulted in the Nosferatu developing a culture of moving unseen among mortals and vampires alike. But without further ado, the top 10 vampires of Clan Nosferatu. Number 10. Rabbat. Near the beginning of the 13th century, the Mongols invaded the Qin Empire, devastating the country in a mere 2 years. They destroyed one town after the other, rolling across China like a flood of hooves and steel. Yet an old woman survived the Mongol onslaught, the woman who would become the Nosferatu, Rabbat. The Mongols captured the little old woman and declared her to be the ugliest thing they had ever seen. They carried her to the court of Temujin, Genghis Khan. She had to crawl from the entrance of the Khan's pavilion to the foot of his throne. A courtier lifted Rabbat's head to display the hideous little woman the Mongols had captured. The great Khan, to the amusement of his court, permitted her to keep her life, on account she was far too ugly to inflict upon the dead, and commanded that she be allowed to dwell in a corner of the royal pavilion as an oddity. During the Khan's lifetime, she was allowed to beg for scraps from the plates of the courtiers. However, when the Khan died and his 4 sons split the Khanate, Rabbat was given to Ogedei Khan, Genghis Khan's 3rd son, and he had no use for the old woman, casting her out of his palace at Karakorum. Rabbat, by this time, had outlived everyone that she had ever known, and was too feeble to care for herself, so she went to find a place to die quietly. Yet death would elude her. Sabanu, a Nosferatu in service to Baba Yaga, the Iron Hag of Russia, noted the wizened little woman and her ability to endure adversity. In his twisted mind, the gift of immortality would give her a chance to avenge herself on the Mongols. Even though Rabbat begged Sabanu to let her die, he embraced her. As befit the Nosferatu curse, her body, already hideous to look upon, turned into something truly ghastly. Rabbat cursed Sabanu as he abandoned her to her fate. Sire and child would never meet again. Rabbat traveled west, avoiding the shapeshifters of the Beast Court and the Cathians who styled themselves the Wan Kuei. She finally came to rest for a time in Constantinople, where she was discovered by fellow Nosferatu who were kinder to her than her sire. Indeed, it was the only kinship she had enjoyed in decades. She became loyal to the Byzantine Nosferatu as they taught her more about their clan and their unique traditions. After a time, she traveled to Prague as part of a coterie that provided information saving the life of a Malkavian elder from the Inquisition. Though the lunatics offered her a boon, she declined it, which gained the Malkavians' respect. She gained prestige within the Nosferatu after saving members of her clan from the Inquisition time and again. When Europe was ravaged by the bubonic plague, the Black Death, Rabbat's influence within the clan was at its height. While the plague itself bore no threat to vampires, it made healthy mortals a commodity, and soon the vampire elders and Ancilla began fighting with each other over the rapidly dwindling food supply. Rabbat had no compunction against feeding from the diseased, a decision which would come back to haunt her. The elders sent Rabbat from Prague to Venice to lead the Nosferatu of that city. In Venice, Rabbat had created Childer, and those Childer fed and intermingled blood with the other vampires. Then Rabbat's progeny began to perish. The bubonic plague had somehow mutated within Rabbat's body, becoming something that could strike down a vampire, a disease that has since been labeled the Scourge. After 2 of Venice's primogen fell into torpor as a result of the Scourge, the disease was traced back to the Nosferatu, and from there to Rabbat. The prince, in a panic, declared a blood hunt on Rabbat. The Giovanni supported the hunt, killing all of Rabbat's progeny who had not already succumbed to the Scourge. Rabbat fled from Venice and Italy. Word got back to the inner circle of the Camarilla, and the Nosferatu were forced to petition for Rabbat's name to be added to the Camarilla's red list of vampire fugitives. Since then, Rabbat has lived in fear and hiding. She has considered ending her own existence on several occasions, but when she attempted to walk out into the sun, her survival instinct overwhelmed her despondence. Even the disease for which she is shunned and hated cannot kill her. she is totally immune to the Scourge, as well as the bubonic plague and leprosy that she unwittingly carries around with her, specifically in the form of centuries-old fleas that originally carried the sickness and now are her ghouls, having adapted and survived thanks to her rotten blood. With the advance of technology, Rabbat, in order to avoid the Nosferatu in their tunnels, sleeps in a panel van modified to allow no ray of sunlight to enter during the day. At night, she hunts and feeds from terrified mortals, their adrenaline-charged blood being one of her few pleasures. When need be, she robs gas stations and convenience stores for money, fuel, and any other supplies she might need. Though she is embittered by the twist of fate that has put her in her circumstances, Rabbat would give anything to serve her clan once again. After Rabbat accidentally infected a Toreador elder of South Carolina, the Camarilla is once again prepared to bring down the full weight of its power against her. Their sense of urgency is magnified by the CDC's unknowing pursuit of Rabbat, though for the government, it's a case of mysterious and seemingly unrelated incidents of a mutated strain of the bubonic plague that pops up in rural counties. Though Rabbat is hunted, she still has allies, whether or not she knows it. The Nosferatu have never raised a hand to hunt Rabbat, despite being the clan that holds the trophy on her. In fact, the elders of the Nosferatu have discussed Rabbat more frequently in the wake of the death of Baba Yaga and the rumors surrounding the Iron Hag's demise. If the Niktuku did destroy the hag, then Rabbat and her Scourge may be the only weapon they have that can save them from the Nosferatu antediluvian's wrath. Plans have been made to provide a safe place for Rabbat, where she can be cared for and hidden until the night arises when the Nosferatu need her. But the Nosferatu are not the only ones who want to protect Rabbat. The Malkavians, insane though they may be, have long memories. They remember their friends as vividly as they do their enemies. Unlike the other clans, they have never forgotten what Rabbat did for them during the time of the Inquisition. Unlike the Nosferatu, the Camarilla Malkavians have expended resources to finding a cure for the Scourge in order to repay the debt they feel that they owe her. Number 9. Tarique al-Hajj. Tarique was born in Spain in the late 8th century. In 807 AD, Tarique was embraced by a 4th-generation Nosferatu, possibly the matriarch. It was after his embrace that he converted to Islam. As part of his new religious fervor, he desired to see the holy city of Mecca with his own eyes, and traveled from Spain to Arabia on a Hajj, a holy pilgrimage. When he arrived, he could not approach Mecca, as it was protected from the entry of supernatural beings by a force called the Keening. The Keening is a phenomenon centered on the black stone inside the Kaaba, and manifests as a psychic shrieking that can only be heard, and felt, by unholy creatures, such as vampires, during the day. This makes it nearly impossible for a vampire to make their haven in Mecca, as it can even be felt by vampires when in torpor. The vampires of the Ashira believe that the Keening is the result of Allah's power emanating from the black stone, but the mages of the Ali Batain contend that the Keening is the result of magic they cast upon the stone to expel the genie and other unclean spirits from Mecca during the age of the Devil Kings. Vampires of the Ashira do not feel the Keening quite as strongly as others, so it is merely uncomfortable for them rather than intolerable. In fact, some use it as a kind of mystical alarm clock to know when dawn is approaching. Despite being unable to enter Mecca, Tarique's dead heart was filled with joy to merely look on the city of the Prophet. However, in 930 AD, a splinter sect of Islam called the Karmatians stole the black stone from Mecca and carried it to their fortress at Hajar. For 22 years, the Keening was silent. Tarique, with the help of a gangrel named Zayed al-Shamal and the mysterious Ali Batin, fortified and defended Mecca from the intrusions of vampires, including members of the Ashira. During that time, Tarique developed a school of blood magic called Seer that tapped into the web of faith in the Middle East. With it, he developed wards that dampened the effects of the Keening, allowing faithful vampires to dwell near Mecca and Medina. When the Black Stone was returned in 952 AD, Tarique took the name al-Hajj and declared that he and his progeny would forevermore be the stewards and guardians of Mecca. Medina was already under the protection of the Lasombra, Suleiman ibn al-Abdullah, leader of the Ashira and mentioned in the top 10 vampires of Clan Lasombra. Tarique fought with Saladin in the Crusades, but withdrew from outright warfare when the Mongols attacked from the east, focusing his efforts on protecting the holy sites from unbelievers. At the end of the 19th century, Tarique met with his old ally Jyhad and an Ottoman ventru named Abdul Rahman. The three agreed that the holy sites required mortal protectors with the advance of the European powers and the European vampires that would inevitably follow. They selected a mortal agent behind whom they could unify the tribes, city-states, sheikdoms, and nomads of the Arab Peninsula. Abdulaziz bin Abdul Rahman al-Saud, the first king of Saudi Arabia, the Ashira, the al-Hajj, and the Washin were united behind the House of Saud, and on September 23, 1932, Abdulaziz ibn Saud announced the creation of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Tarique has directed most of his focus on the protection of the holy sites against a threat that he has seen only in his daytime dreams since then. Number 8. Aine. One of the most dreaded fates among vampires is to be lost to the beast forever. A vampire who succumbs to the beast is called a wight, and no prince worthy of the title will ever allow one to remain loose in his domain for long. Most wights are, thankfully, little more than animals. Unfortunately, Aine, or Black Annis, as she is known to the mortals she has terrorized for centuries, is no ordinary wight. Aine was born in Celtic Britain in 19 AD. She was a priestess of her people. They would ask her to bless their animals, their crops, and their children. They brought her sacrifices, goats, chickens, and grain, and she would give them to the three mothers for the good of the people. After a battle, the warriors of the people would bring her their dead, the heads of those fallen in battle, and the captives they had taken. These too were given to the great queen on plumes of smoke, for victory also came from the three mothers. Some of those she sacrificed to the great queen were called Iron Men, who came from far away and spoke a strange language. These Iron Men, these Romans, did not make very good sacrifices, for they screamed as she sent them to the great queen. Then the day came when the warriors could not throw back the Iron Men. They came to her glade and her hut and set fire to everything. I knew that the three mothers would be angered because the people had allowed their glade to be burned while they hid. As she hid in the forest with the people, a shadow came over her. Aine believed the creature to be a Fomor, for it was so hideous it could only be a creature born of doom and death. The Fomor called itself Balair, and offered her the power to throw the Romans out of her land. But the Nosferatu was lying, because Fomor never helped anyone, and that it had been sent to punish her for allowing the Iron Men to burn the sacred glade. She was proven right when Balair seized her by the throat and drank her blood. Aine awoke feeling sick. She was not in the Isles of the Blessed, but the Fomor had eaten her. The Fomor explained that she was now like him, and she fed on his blood. Aine realized that if you are eaten by one of the Fomor, you become a Fomor yourself. She drank his blood, though it disgusted her at first, but after a few sips, she realized that his blood was the sweetest thing she had ever tasted. After drinking from the Fomor, she fell into a sleep while her body transformed into that of a Nosferatu. Aine awoke in awful pain, but the Fomor was gone. She found him later. He had fought the Iron Men himself, and killed many of them, but was wounded, pierced by spears, and burned by flame. The Fomor begged her to help him, but all she could think about was how sweet his blood had been the last time she drank it, and that she wanted more. But he was begging her for help. But then again, she was a Fomor now, just like him, and Fomor never, ever help anyone. She bit down on his throat and drank his sweet blood. She drank until there was nothing left to drink, and then escaped back into the forest. Eventually she got hungry again, but she didn't have another Fomor to drink from. She tried drinking her own blood, but that didn't make her less hungry, and the light burned her so that she could only move in the darkness. One night, as she peered at her face in a pool of water under a full moon, the enormity of what she had become was clear. She looked like the Fomor, but not so ugly. Her face resembled what the old women claimed that the Great Queen looked like. Perhaps she wasn't a Fomor at all. Perhaps the Great Queen had taken Aine for her own, made her into an instrument of punishment for the Iron Men and the weaklings who had allowed the glade to burn. She had become the Morrigan, a being of terror and greatness, an instrument of divine vengeance to destroy the Great Queen's enemies. It is uncertain when Aine, later called Black Annis, fell to the beast, but for centuries she has brought her terror down on the north of England. Despite being a white, she is not mindless. In fact, unlike most whites, she can still use several disciplines at high level, including Obfuscate, Potence, and Protean, allowing her to sneak upon and then rip apart her victims in a wild frenzy. Most of her killing is confined to the rural north of England. Aine is more rumor than fact to the vampires of Britain, and those vampires sent to identify the clever beast or supernatural murderer in the north were never heard from again. Despite being a white, Aine's mind operates according to certain deranged rules. She spends half the year, between May Eve and Halloween, in torpor. Her victims are selected according to a rule or a process comprehensible only to her mind. But even in the modern nights, mortals know to shut their windows tight and stay out of the woods when Black Annis is on the hunt. Number 7. Josef Zvi. Josef Zvi was born in 1142 AD in Prague's Jewish quarter, about 700 years ahead of the quarter's most famous bohemian, Franz Kafka. As the son of a rabbi, Joseph expected to follow in his father's footsteps, but when Joseph was 12, his father died, and as the man of the family, he took up butchery to support his household, setting aside his dreams of becoming a scholar. The Jews of Prague were familiar with violence in the 200 years that they resided in the city. The first of several pogroms against them was in 1096. In 1160, when Joseph was 18, he was set upon by a group of boys who attacked him, dislocated his jaw, broke his nose, and crushed half his head before leaving him to die. After the attack, a Nosferatu named Yehuda came upon the dying teenager and asked Joseph if he desired revenge. Joseph, half blind and nearly unconscious, managed to rasp out that he did not. Yehuda then asked if he would protect others from the violence he had suffered. Joseph, with his jaw too inflamed to speak further, reached up and grasped the Nosferatu elder's hand and squeezed. Satisfied with the young man's answers, Yehuda embraced Joseph that very night. Yehuda remained with Joseph for a time, teaching him the ways of vampires and the lore of the Nosferatu before departing into the east. Joseph became the nocturnal protector of the Jewish quarter and keeper of the tunnels that ran beneath Prague. The more powerful Cainites of Prague, the Bruja, the Cappadocians, the Tremere, and the Zamitzi, were largely uninterested in the Jewish quarter, so they were content to leave Joseph to his domain. However, Joseph, for all the good he did his people, also brought peril upon them. Some vampires, for some unknown quirk of their blood, such as the entirety of Clan Ventru, or for psychological reasons of their own, develop prey exclusions, and Joseph was the latter. His was that he could only feed on the blood of children, but he would not feed from the children of the Jewish quarter. Instead, he fed on the blood of the Christian and pagan infants of Prague. Occasionally, some child died as a result, and the Praguers noticed that their children died while the Jews did not, inevitably casting suspicion and breeding wild tales about the blood of Christian children being used in Jewish rituals, much to Joseph's sorrow. Joseph's de facto authority over the Jewish quarter was undermined near the end of the 12th century when the self-proclaimed Ventru Prince of Prague, in a bid to exert his authority, demanded that Joseph open the Jewish quarter to his coterie for feeding. Joseph refused out of hand, so Rudolf Brandl, outraged, sent his ghoul assassins to the Jewish quarter to put Joseph to final death. Instead of dying, Joseph retreated into the Nosferatu tunnels, emerging in Prague Castle, Brandl's own haven, during the day. It was then that Josef Zvi put Rudolf Brandl to death, sparking the revolt in Prague against the Premysls and their Zamitzi masters. In the chaos that followed, Joseph managed to secure alliances with Ekaterina the Wise, leader of the Promethean Bruja, discussed in my Top 10 Vampires of Clan Bruja video, and Garanal of Petrin Hill, leader of the Cappadocians, so that Joseph became the de facto Prince of Prague. During the reign of Prince Joseph, Prague became a safe haven for the Jews of Bohemia. Even after Joseph II, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire, signed the Edict of Tolerance in 1782, permitting, or in some cases forcing, the Jews to integrate into the larger Holy Roman Empire, Joseph remained in Prague to defend the poor and Orthodox Jews who remained behind. But time passed, and Josef saw his former allies Ekaterina and Gerard flee or die. He was forced to find new allies against the plots of the Ventru and the Tremere. So, he feigned submission to the Tzimisce Methuselah slumbering beneath Prague, Shagra, the Destroyer. None but Josef knew of the alliance, and Shagra believed that Josef was her pawn, but it was Josef who fed the Methuselah false information that kept her in torpor. Josef's V met his final death sometime in 1939, when the German army occupied Prague. As Josef led a ragged resistance against the Germans, he was destroyed by flamethrowers. Number 6. Federico diPadua. The Camarilla has many tools at its disposal. As discussed in previous videos, they have tenacious archons, merciless justicars, and an implacable warlord. But from the very beginning, the Camarilla has had only one right hand, Federico diPadua, the longest-serving archon in the history of the sect. In his mortal days, Federico was a condottieri, a mercenary who fought in dozens of princely wars across Europe. Federico found himself in the pay of the Romanian voivode, János Hunyadi, the White Knight of Wallachia, and the father of Matthias Corvinus, the future king of Hungary and Croatia. It was here that Federico met and mentored the young Templar Gilbert de Harfleur. In 1444, for reasons that remain unknown to Federico even in the modern nights, a Nosferatu named Morrigan embraced him against his will before abandoning him, an act for which he has never forgiven his sire. But he found a proper teacher in the form of Josef von Bauren, one of the founders of the Camarilla, and its first Nosferatu justicar. Von Bauren was Federico's point of entry into the Camarilla, and he believes wholeheartedly in the cause of the sect. While he believes that the Camarilla is fundamentally just, he is not blindly obedient. Federico is a worldly and cynical vampire who questions what he is told, and when it does not appear sensible, and defends the causes of neonates against their elders when the younger vampires have a fair complaint. Additionally, he opposes the general Camarilla policy of rejecting the very notion of Gehenna and the return of the antediluvians. Despite his long service, Federico has never been offered the title of Justicar by the Inner Circle. He has never asked for the job either, but the question is still preempted by the Inner Circle saying that he is simply too valuable in the field to be moved to the more administrative post of Justicar. Whether Federico is simply a victim of his own success, as many competent people throughout history have been, or his habit of not shutting up and following orders holds him back, is a question only the Inner Circle and Federico could answer for certain. In the modern nights, he served the Justicars Petrodon and Petrodon's successor and child, Cock Robin. The two unmasked the murderers responsible for Petrodon's death and brought them to justice. Federico was also present at the Battle of New York in 1999, where he squared off against the fearsome Sabbat Cardinal Polonia. The La Sombra sent Federico into torpor before fleeing the city, handing the Archon one of the few defeats of his career. Since then, Federico has operated on the east coast of the United States, aiding the Camarilla efforts to reclaim Washington, D.C. and Atlanta from the Sabbat, and perhaps looking for a rematch against Polonia. Number 5. Teresita. Mass embraces are one of the preferred tactics of the Sabbat. Quiet as the Camarilla likes to keep it though, they have, from time to time, created Childer simply as cannon fodder to wear down an enemy for the real attack. Teresita was one such embrace by the Camarilla Archon Gerard in 1672. But Teresita survived, and made plans to put Gerard into the hands of the Sabbat at the first opportunity. With her entrance into the Sword of Cain sealed in blood and betrayal, Teresita sought entry into the Black Hand as quickly as she could. Using the natural gifts of the Nosferatu, she infiltrated numerous Camarilla cities on espionage and terror missions. She had enough successes that she rose to the rank of Dominion of the Black Hand, a rank just below the Seraphim. Teresita established her haven in Mexico City in order to stay close to the center of Sabbat power. Following the death of Seraphim Jyhad and the disappearance of Seraphim Isim Erbal and the betrayal of many of the Assamite anti-tribu, Teresita has openly, perhaps too openly, lobbied to replace either Jyhad or Isim in the Seraphim. Teresita certainly has the popular support from below, as many Black Hand operatives were trained by her during her time as Dominion, and she also has support from above as she is known to the consistory due to her constant presence in Mexico City. As for the present Seraphim, Jav, he appears indifferent to her, and Elimelech, well, he's probably chained up somewhere in a room to keep him from accidentally killing anyone. With those pieces in place, Regent Melinda Galbraith appointed Teresita as acting Seraphim. Within the wider Sabbat, Teresita is a vocal ultra-conservative. For those not in the know about Sabbat politics, the ultra-conservatives are the faction that supports the notion of the Sabbat as the army of Gehenna against the antediluvians, and that this notion of personal freedom for vampires is nonsense and needs to be stamped out, otherwise everyone is going to die. So her position is, all the Sabbat need to fall in line and fight the Jyhad or get the hell out of the way. Number 4. Gerard Rafin. During the second great wave of immigration into the United States between 1892 and 1924, a French tinkerer and laborer by the name of Gerard Rafin washed up on Ellis Island with the rest of the poor, tired, huddled masses seeking a better life in the land of opportunity. Rafin took up residence on the Lower East Side of New York, where he made a modest living working and repairing machines and devices. His mechanical and technological skill were noted by the Nosferatu of New York, and in 1905 he was recruited into the clan by a vampire known as Radcliffe with Teeth. Though Radcliffe was Camarilla, New York was still under the rule of the Sabbat. However, the Camarilla-Sabbat conflict was less vicious among the Nosferatu than the other clans. Rafin himself saw the sectarian war as more of a disagreement between family members than a life-or-death existential struggle, and made contact with his Nosferatu anti-tribu brothers and sisters. Unlike many other vampires, Rafin had no trouble keeping up with the inexorable march of technological progress in the 20th century. Indeed, he acquired every copy of Popular Science, Physical Review, and any other mechanical or technological magazine and periodical he could lay his talons on. What time he didn't spend poring over technological advances, he spent listening to the Nosferatu lore with great interest, especially concerning the mythical monsters created by the Nosferatu antediluvian to hunt down and slay his wayward Nosferatu progeny, the Nictuku. Rafin took it upon himself to bring what was above the world down into the world below. He brought electricity and wiring down into the Nosferatu warrens, lights, power, radio, telephones. He stole or built surveillance equipment and booby traps to defend the warrens against uninvited guests. In the 1970s, Rafin made his crowning achievement with a group of other Nosferatu. He plopped his own network right on top of the Defense Department's ARPANET, faster and more secure and more flexible than the telephone. Rafin had the foresight to realize that he could potentially enable every Nosferatu in the world to be able to communicate secretly and in an instant. And so Rafin and some of his trusted associates went on a campaign across America, armed with breadboards, jumper cables, copper wire, and a dream. Warren by warren, they linked up new nodes to the main network until Rafin was connected with Nosferatu across the nation, and soon the world. That dream was SchreckNet, the Nosferatu's secret network piggybacking the ARPANET, and later the Internet. To throw the paranoid non-Nosferatu off his trail, Rafin adopted the persona of Uncle Smelly, an exaggeration of every Nosferatu stereotype dialed up to 11, a kind of carnival persona that would make P.T. Barnum proud, and that he used to gain the trust of unknown Nosferatu, and to quickly bypass non-Nosferatu who would rather not deal with this obvious sewer rat. The few vampires who accosted Uncle Smelly or tried to pry into his business found themselves beaten nearly into torpor thanks to his mastery of potence. In 1999, following the Battle of New York and the Camarilla's conquest of the city, Rafin stopped barnstorming for a while and settled in to see how things would land in the aftermath. After Cardinal Polonius snipped off Michaela's head, the Camarilla's first choice to be prince, the Justicars and Primogen all but forced the role on the leader of New York's Camarilla Nosferatu, Calibros, who was bookish and reclusive, even by Nosferatu standards. Rafin grew frustrated with Calibros' unwillingness to use his power to better the position of the clan in New York. Now he divides his time between lobbying Calibros on behalf of the Nosferatu and maintaining SchreckNet. He occasionally dons the gimmick of Uncle Smelly for outsiders, more so to demonstrate his growing contempt for non-Nosferatu than from any necessity. Number 3. Zelios. The Nosferatu Zelios was born to a merchant family near the end of the 10th century. Rather than enjoy a life of leisure thanks to inherited wealth or enter the family business, Zelios was compelled to study and master engineering and architecture. He traveled throughout Europe to develop his encyclopedic knowledge, gaining fame for his insights and development into the safety and aesthetics of buildings. A Nosferatu named Hannibal recognized that Zelios would be an invaluable asset to the clan, especially with respect to its tunnels and warrens. In 1020 AD, Hannibal brought Zelios into Clan Nosferatu, and Zelios' change is rather interesting. His skin took on the texture of stone, the lines of his body took on a hard, angular quality. But Zelios was not bitter about his embrace. In fact, he now had all of eternity before him to perfect his craft. In the century after his embrace, Zelios gained fame amongst the undead as he had among the living, building castles for wealthy Cainites of Transylvania and celebrated in the courts of the East and the West. Few knew at the time, and Zelios himself did not understand, that he had an innate sense of geomancy, and that many of the castles he built were located on nodes, the intersection between ley lines running across the earth like rivers of spiritual energy. In addition to building his castles, he always added secret passages throughout the castles, with secret means of ingress and egress only accessible by those with certain vampiric disciplines. Despite putting secret passages in his patrons' castles, he himself never used them, though the temptation to do so was strong. Yet, Zelios' work and the insights that spurred them have been influenced by a hand beyond his own. He has studied and restudied his own work, frustrated that there was something that he could not quite grasp. Zelios spent more centuries trying to discover the source and purpose of his intuition. Zelios traveled to Egypt to study the geomancy of that country in the libraries of the followers of Set. Zelios even risked a journey east into the domains of the Kuai Jin to study the principles and rituals of feng shui that they used to harness, divert, and channel the natural energies of the earth. Eventually, he pieced enough together to realize that at least 7 of his castles in Transylvania had reinforced a web of geomantic energy that had been laid over the mountains since ancient times. What's more, his castles formed the points of a massive glyph, one that could be used for binding or summoning. And Zelios suddenly became aware of what it was he had inadvertently bound, the demon Kupala. After concluding a study of the occult architecture in the Middle East, Zelios departed for the New World, sensing that the days of castles and kings was coming to a close. Out of respect for his age and power, Zelios became a primogen, though his skill as a politician paled in comparison to his skill as an architect. In time, the Sabbats solidified their control of New York City. Before this, Zelios began work on a labyrinthine set of tunnels underneath New York. As he suspected, there was no longer a need for palaces and castles, but he could still put his skills to use below the ground. Zelios dug downward, into the ground, helping the Nosferatu construct the underground kingdoms in America and fortifying them against intruders, though it is unknown whether he put any stock into the old tales about the Niktuku. However, to his chagrin, the Nosferatu anti-tribu had the audacity to not only seize, but modify his tunnels in New York over the centuries. Sometime before 1998, Zelios met final death at the hands, or talons, of parties unknown. Zelios never realized that his geomantic intuitions that drove his work in Transylvania centuries before had come from the Nosferatu antediluvian himself. The Nosferatu antediluvian had enslaved Kupala in another move of the true Jyhad between the grandchildren of Cain. Number 2. El Diablo Verde. Confession time. I am a lifelong professional wrestling fan, and this character was hilarious, and not everything in the world of darkness needs to be grim, or gothic, or punk, or saturated with angst. So I'm adding him right here. El Diablo Verde, the Tijuana Terror, the Mexican Nightmare, the extreme wrestling warfare heavyweight champion of the world. As a mortal, the luchador El Diablo Verde won the Mexican Heavyweight Championship at the age of 18 in his rookie year. His meteoric career continued through an unprecedented 50 straight victories in Máscara contra Máscaras Luchas de Apuestas, or mask versus mask matches, which is serious business in Mexico. The real-life luchador Atlantis has taken more masks than anyone in the history of Lucha Libre, and he's only got 18 in a 36-year career. But back to El Diablo Verde, since this is Mexico. El Diablo Verde came to the attention of a Sabbat pack who kidnapped him, dragged him to a cemetery, and tried to give him the creation rites. Following his embrace, the Sabbat were attacked by another group of vampires. The luchador managed to come to his senses and took the shovel that the Sabbat intended to club him over the head with before throwing him in a shallow grave. He used it to decapitate vampires left and right, and his newfound immortal strength to tear vampires limb from limb. By the end of the nocturnal battle royale, El Diablo Verde was the last vampire standing. Before the sun rose, El Diablo Verde pulled a stone slab over the open grave that the Sabbat intended for him and slept the day away. Now, the mask is one of the most important elements of Lucha Libre, but El Diablo Verde realized, after he awoke the next evening, that he could never take off the mask again, as his face was more hideous than anything he could have imagined in life thanks to his sire, the Nosferatu El Tiburon. He fled across the border into the United States to join the largest professional wrestling company, sports entertainment company in the world, Extreme Wrestling Warfare, trademark Ymir Sports Entertainment, subsidiary of Magadon Enterprises, a division of Pentex Corporation. El Diablo Verde discovered that he was not the only supernatural entertainer in EWW. The cruiserweight champion of EWW was Huitzel Colibri, a lightning-fast luchador who was rumored to have the ability to transform into a jaguar, a Bastet in other words. The international champion was Diamond Duncan Dunson, a violent brute in a blood-red kilt whose gimmick provoked whispers that his act in the ring might be a bit more than an act. The 23-time tag team champions were the Too Hot Nation of Harlem Ghetto Posse Gangsta Experience, comprised of New York brothers Sucker T and Farouk Scorpio Mustafa of the Assamite Anti-Tribu. And this doesn't even include the mortals who graduated from the EWW wrestling school, whose Herculean physiques were due to plenty of rest, exercise, diet, and perfectly legal and safe supplements manufactured by Pentex. None of this menagerie of freaks and villains fazed El Diablo Verde, however. He was a Lucha Libre prodigy in life, and the gifts of Cain only made him more formidable, adding such physically impossible moves as the 450 Corkscrew Diablo con Rana, the Chupacabra Helldriver, and the Javelin de Infierno to his arsenal of finishing moves. Even though El Diablo Verde is nominally a member of the Camarilla, though he occasionally violates the Masquerade on live TV in front of millions of people by using disciplines. Even better, no one questions it because the fans are entertained, and the critics wave off this spectacle with the simplistic dismissal that it's all fake anyway. There is no greater tool for enforcing the Masquerade than the unearned cynicism of the mentally lazy. Anyway, El Diablo Verde is the reigning, defending EWW heavyweight champion with only a handful of losses and the love and adoration of his fans, Los Hijos del Diablo, who go to his matches and buy his merchandise, masks, t-shirts, pictures, ice cream bars. Diablo Mania is running wild across the world of darkness. Number 1. Baba Yaga. The Nosferatu Methuselah known as Baba Yaga, the Little Grandmother, the Iron Hag, is the source of countless legends and stories inside and outside of the clan. 7,000 years ago, Baba Yaga was an earth priestess, her magic tied to the very land itself. Her duty was to keep the people, the land, and the spirits in harmony. But evil came to Russia, a vampire who was ancient even millennia ago, the Nosferatu Antediluvian. At that time, the thirst of ages had not yet come upon the Antediluvian, so it fed indiscriminately from the mortals of Russia. The spirits told Baba Yaga of this evil that had come among her people, so she went to confront it. She was shocked when she laid eyes on the Antediluvian, because it was the most hideous creature she had ever seen, something that she could not even imagine. She cursed the vampire's hideous visage and hideous acts and commanded him to leave and never return. The Antediluvian was amused and slunk off, feigning defeat. But the Nosferatu Antediluvian returned for her. She hurled spell after spell at the Antediluvian, attacked with wind, vines, water, even infused her hands with the power of the sun itself, burning the vampire's dead flesh from his bones. But then, his face twisted into something that could barely be described as a smile. He vanished. It was then that the animals of the forest, under the vampire's thrall, turned against her, clawing at her and biting her. She had not expected this, could not think of what to do to fight against it, so she blindly fled into the forest, and straight into the claws of the Nosferatu antediluvian. The antediluvian held her fast in his iron grip. He would not kill her. Instead, he would make her his servant, and together they would rule all of Russia. The antediluvian stole Baba Yaga's life and gave her damnation in its place. When she awoke again, she felt her connection to the earth waning, as the antediluvian commanded her to obey him. But his hold was not as strong as it might have been. Baba Yaga summoned the 7 great dragons, the Zmei, to kill the vampire, but the antediluvian was clever and sent the dragons chasing after illusions of him. In a final act born of the purest despair, Baba Yaga reached beyond our world, and the world beyond that, and further still into a realm of pure evil. She summoned the very embodiment of fear and corruption, Koschei, the Deathless. The land cried out in pain with every step Koschei took upon it, bound to do Baba Yaga's will, and stepped forward to meet the antediluvian in battle. The monster freed Baba Yaga from the antediluvian's control before it clashed with the ancient vampire. Baba Yaga retreated from the battlefield, horrified by what she had become, and by what she had wrought on the land she once loved. None who witnessed the battle remained, even the spirits. When Baba Yaga spoke to the spirits who would still interact with her, they said that the antediluvian no longer remained in Russia, but Koschei the Deathless was on the loose. In time, Baba Yaga sired a brood, who spread through Kiev and Rus, and then into the wider world. Many of the modern Nosferatu are descended from Baba Yaga. Some speculate that there was another 4th generation Nosferatu who also sired parts of the clan named the Matriarch, but it is possible that the Matriarch and Baba Yaga are one and the same. For reasons known only to her, Baba Yaga spent much of Russia's history asleep. But in the winter of 1990, Baba Yaga arose from torpor. She found Russia greatly changed and in ways not to her liking. The Iron Hag summoned the brood of vampires in Russia still loyal to her and put a plan into motion to bring Russia back under her talons. On August 18, 1991, in the shadow of the nearly bloodless coup that signaled the fall of the Soviet Union, Baba Yaga and her minions paid a call on the bourgeois Revolutionary Council that had manipulated the Soviet Union since the October Revolution of 1917. 3 nights later, the entire leadership of the bourgeois council and their allies had simply disappeared. Poof, never to be seen or heard from again. By 1992, Baba Yaga and her army were hunting the supernatural creatures of Russia, either to bring them into line or cast them into destruction. Even more terrifying was that none could escape or receive aid. Baba Yaga and her human mage allies had raised a mystical barrier around the entirety of Russia, preventing entry or exit that came to be known as the Shadow Curtain, though a few managed to slip through the curtain and deliver news of what was going on in Russia to the outside world. That sounds oddly familiar somehow with a real-life event. Anyway, the native supernaturals of Russia fought for their very lives against Baba Yaga's army of vampires, werewolves, mages, and demons. By 1997, the werewolves had managed to stop losing territory. In May of 1998, in the White Nights Massacre, the werewolves slaughtered a large portion of Baba Yaga's army of the night while they lay in torpor outside of St. Petersburg. They followed up with a second attack on a Muscovite Orthodox church that claimed the lives of Baba Yaga's bourgeois servant Pavel and 10 of the ghoul mages who maintained the Shadow Curtain. The weakening of the Shadow Curtain enabled more werewolves to charge into Russia to reinforce their beleaguered cousins, but it also allowed a monster far more terrifying than Baba Yaga herself to enter into the motherland. In 1998, Baba Yaga disappeared from the face of Russia. Her blood-bound servants felt their connection to her suddenly severed, and the shadow curtain around Russia collapsed. But wise Nosferatu know who was responsible for the Iron Hag's death. The Niktuku, the hunting hounds of the antediluvian that he sicks on the progeny he despises, called Nosferatu. After Baba Yaga's death, many Nosferatu fear the night will come when the antediluvian's wrath finally arrives at their doorstep. After all, the Book of Nod states that the first to die in any Jyhad are the Nosferatu. And that concludes my list of the top 10 vampires of Clan Nosferatu. I think it was a good mix. Some good Nosferatu, some bad Nosferatu. A Nosferatu fallen to the beast, and a Nosferatu luchador, most importantly. If and when I get around to a video on the antediluvians themselves, it will be interesting to discuss the Nosferatu antediluvian, as he is the only one who outright hates the clan that he sired and wants them all dead. And speaking of clans who have an antagonistic relationship with their founder, the next video in the series will be on Clan Ravnos. And if you are familiar with the events of the Week of Nightmares, well, you know that the Ravnos, or what's left of them, have a legitimate complaint against their great-grandsire. Until next time.